Jan, thank you so much for being with us today. You want to tell us a little bit about the history of SAFE and World App in particular?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's interesting is that SAFE and WorldCoin have kind of like grown together over time. But similarly how, to my understanding, the WorldCoin team back then decided to build on Ethereum, they decided to build on SAFE because it was kind of like a neutral ground on which to build. It was highly established, it was proven to be secure, it was super battle tested, both of them, Ethereum and SAFE. And it was really kind of like something where you could build upon and then come together and start, okay, how can we not only just see there's parts of our tech stack used, but actually improve it together so that things like passkey transaction or signatures are possible and so on and so forth.
Do you have some background you can share with us on that integration, like how World App actually uses SAFE?
Yeah, so actually in one of the best ways possible, the user doesn't notice.
Exactly, yes.
And that means basically once you create a proper account through World App, there is actually SAFE deployed for you. It depends on kind of like over the course of the time how the external setup looks like, if it becomes a multisig or not. But basically it uses the smart contracts and part of our tech stack to secure all of the assets that a user has. Meaning that it's actually something where the user will always be self-custodial. And I think that's quite important.
Right.
It means that they can use this account in different UIs if ever they would wish to do so. They have full control over it, and they have full control not only about the assets, but in this case actually their identity. And that is actually quite key from at least my perspective, and why this fits so well together, because it's not just, oh, I want to secure some assets, it's also about the identity piece, and for me something that has to be in a self-custodial way, meaning you have full control as a user.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about WorldChain, which is, arguably one of the primary reasons we're here. Clearly, World App uses SAFE, as we've discussed, but it's also available to anyone that wanted to deploy an application on WorldChain as well. So, you just want to tell us what are some of the type things they could do with that infrastructure?
Yeah, I think what's really cool about WorldChain is that with this new L2, we're actually moving towards a world where the default account that someone has on a network is a smart account, in this case a SAFE, right? But this also means that developers will have to adjust a bit, kind of like, okay, how do I enable that people can, or that I can as a developer work with these smart accounts as the default account, right? On Ethereum, we're moving towards this as well, but we're definitely not as close as we are on WorldChain. Now, what we bring towards developers is that, for one, we have highly trusted smart contracts. I say smart contracts because it's not just a smart account, it's also kind of like what you can plug on top of it through what we call modules, so kind of like the other smart contracts that you can use to enable things like a recovery logic or access control or anything like that. But on top of that, we then have an infrastructure, so that's an SDK for developers. We have an API that you can use to understand what is actually happening on chain. And then we have the UI that really allows you as a team to manage assets, but that's kind of like where the difference lies. We love that developers build their own UI, their own application with this infrastructure under the hood, where the UI is for teams, but many applications are for individuals, including World App. On top of that, because really every account is a smart account, we can now also think around, well, should the user care about gas cost? Should the user really feel that they're doing something on chain, or are we actually abstracting a lot of that away? World App is one of the most sophisticated ways to do that. I think if someone uses World App, they barely notice that they're doing something on chain. And that's where the gas station comes into play, where we can enable other developers to do the same, where we allow them to really abstract these gas costs away from the user, so they don't even notice that, oh, I might need this and that token to do something.
And that's a key, kind of a key point. Like you mentioned, World App. Like we've always wanted to create an experience that, forget being crypto savvy for a moment. Even tech savvy users could feel comfortable with an application without having to be aware that you're connected to a blockchain, or there's a thing called gas, or how do I pay for gas? So we tried to make the user experience like for a novice user, but put enough, put the rails on.
With World App, it's for us really kind of like at the forefront where we see, okay, how can you do this across multiple areas where it becomes more of a Web 2-like experience, and that is something we really want to enable for every developer that comes to WorldChain. So with a safe under the hood, you can do this wherever you want.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. I mean, I think we have a great partnership, and we're super interested. You mentioned it earlier, just working together to kind of continue to improve the use cases around. I don't know if you want to call it generically, like chain interaction and safety. That's a pretty boring term, but I think those kind of fundamentals are kind of key to adoption in general. I know y'all are working on a ton of great new features, and some of them you probably don't talk about just yet, but is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah, so we recently kind of like started teasing a bit towards the direction that we want to head towards. Short term, it's exactly kind of like these pieces that come together of making the user experience great in an ecosystem, be that gas abstraction, be that using passkeys, anything like that. And that is something where we're also currently working on something called 7702, basically a standard that will allow for anyone who had an EOA, had a private key-based wallet before, that they can actually then use a logic to use safe on top of that. So that will be very exciting, and something where with the next Ethereum upgrades and so on, that's something where we're working very closely on. And then on a more kind of like longer term perspective, we recently launched Safe Foundry, which is basically kind of like a hub where we share our R&D, and this will go towards the direction of chain abstraction, meaning what is currently possible in a world world chain type ecosystem of having a user experience that feels very natural, very intuitive. We want to come to a point where everyone who has a safe not only has this experience in one chain, but actually is able to have it no matter where the assets sit. So that I can interact with World App, and even though maybe my assets are on a completely different network, they might be on Optimism, they might be even on a completely different EVM, it all feels super intuitive. And that is kind of like where we want to go.
Well, look, Jan, I want to thank you so much for your time today, joining us.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Yeah.